Hi, I'm Casey Morris, the owner of Seaworthy Consulting. We offer digital marketing solutions to small businesses across the U.S. Thanks for joining me on our first Seaworthy Client Spotlight interview. In honor of Black History Month, I'm here today with a special guest. Malika Hadley Freydberg is the co-owner of Anansi's Daughters, which is a tourism business based in New Orleans. Well, before we get started, how are you doing today?
I am all right. I'm okay. This is actually my
Yeah,
mother's birthday. So it's a great
awesome.
way to honor her by
Yeah,
doing this interview
yeah.
with you.
Well, let's dive into it. So, you and I both lived in Atlanta for a long time, and of course now I'm in Orlando, and you're in New Orleans. What inspired the move? What drew you to the city?
The city, I actually came here in 2011 to do a burlesque gig. And then I was told to come back the next week, just by friends that through friends like priestesses, stuff like that. They were like, you need to come back next week for Ma'afa, which is the Juneteenth celebration here in New Orleans. And Ma'afa translates to the Middle Passage. So it's when everybody in New Orleans, all races and faiths, join in Congo Square, which is where most of our tours happen, dressed in all white, and everybody offers prayers of their own faith at the sites of where some of the auction blocks used to be. And so that was just such and an intense experience with so much intent behind it. I'd never experienced anything like that. So it was home, like at that point. Mhm.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. That is so cool. And I bet a lot of people don't even know that that happens there. Malika, can you please tell the audience about your business and what makes it unique in the New Orleans tour industry?
Of course. So Anansi's Daughters, of course, tourism, that's most of probably like 90% or something of like New Orleans business and revenue comes from tourism. We're up against 300 plus other tour companies, but we are the only tour company that is owned and run by, we're both high priestesses of Louisiana Plantation Voodoo. And so there's lots of voodoo tours in New Orleans, and very few people of color giving them, much less initiates of the African traditional religions. And so that is what sets us apart. And I think that's what it's beautiful, because the way that our tours are marketed, thank you so much, people who are looking for that, when they're just like, I want to make sure that I'm not getting watered down. I would love to hear it from somebody who's actually their religion and their life. And so it's beautiful because it just pairs us so easily with each other. So it's a lot easier to give tours to people who are not going to be upset about hearing about Black history in New Orleans. It happens. It's bizarre, but it happens. So
Wow, wow, that's amazing. Yeah, and who better to get a tour from than you guys?
I agree personally, but
Yeah, well, it's like you have more of the understanding of the history and everything like that. So that's fantastic. Okay, so we're pretty close in age, so we probably both grew up celebrating Black History Month in school. And I did a little bit of research, and it turns out Black History Month wasn't officially established until 1976. It happened during the bicentennial President Gerald Ford. He urged Americans to, quote, seize the opportunity to honor the too often neglected accomplishments of Black Americans in every endeavor throughout history. So do you feel like Black history is neglected in school and in our society in general?
absolutely, they're actively trying to pull it out of textbooks that barely have it in the textbooks to begin with. I remember a few years ago, because I'm a retired educator, and I remember a few years ago there was a textbook that everybody was livid about, because I think that it was like one sentence about slavery, and it said something like, "And then West Africans came over in boats to help us build the nation." And I was like, okay. I don't even know where to begin. So now they just try to take all of it out. And my mother was an
Wow.
Africana Studies professor. So just to invoke the name of that very powerful ancestor, Dr. Elizabeth Amelia Hadley, she started the Africana Studies department at Simmons College in the late 90s. So I was raised like she sent me to school, and I was blessed to be going to some of the best public schools in the nation, which meant they were predominantly white, coincidentally. And so when I would come home, she would begin a whole new education. So it was like to partially undo some of what she knew they were doing, and also to supplement and augment, everything that she knew they're not going to be teaching me. So I think that's, I was having a conversation with another educator on my tour a couple days ago, and she was just completely stressed out, Black women educator in Brooklyn. And it was the charter school situation, same thing I experienced here. These what is it called? They're called no excuses charter schools. And they want silent hallways. The children are supposed to be, like, we're talking fifth graders, silent classrooms, quiet feet on the stairs. They get deductions for laughing. They get deductions for speaking. They're given nonverbal signals to use with their hands when they need something in the classroom. And that's terrifying to me, because during the pandemic, one of the biggest concerns was the kids are out of school, which means they're not getting that verbal, that's a big part of their development, your mental development. So I'm like, so you're actively trying to mentally stunt at this point predominantly Black kids, because these schools are 97, 98% Black, as far as the students are concerned. So what I told that teacher, because she's just beside herself, she's a youngin', and I'm just like, baby, do it as long as you can, but do not be a living sacrifice. And what I told her was, a lot of the education that's happening now is having to happen outside of the classroom. And so we do get a lot of schools, we get some universities that will book tours with us, because they know that it's missing from their curriculum vitae, et cetera, just not a part of it. But the beautiful thing is, that's the equal opposite reaction. Like, on the one hand, the world has gone crazy, everything's terrifying. On the other hand, we're seeing more genderqueer people on TV. We're seeing all kinds of races and religions, and people are actively seeking out the information that they're trying to obliterate from all the textbooks. So Spirit gonna make a way. Spirit's gonna make a way.
Wow, that is great. I didn't realize that you were getting the school groups. That's wonderful.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So all three of the tours your company offers are actually based around Black culture, history, and lore. So what inspired you to create these tours?
We created these tours because I've worked for a couple of different tour companies here in New Orleans, always very well-meaning superiors, as far as their, ranking in the company who I answer to. But every situation, it was a white male, and they don't trust oral history. And the people of Treme, the oldest Black neighborhood in the nation, their families have been here for generations. So I would sit and talk with them, and they're telling me what we're getting wrong. And I'm trying to go back to my boss and say, actually, this is this. And he's going to say, well, there's no way to verify that, because they don't trust oral history. And so High Priestess Eshe and I were just talking about it. And from a Western standpoint, we're more educated than most of the people that we work for. So it's like, even in the way that the Western world honors it, we're both master's level at least. And then from the oral tradition, the griot standpoint, it's just the fact that this is our culture, and we do have these conversations. So we just realized, we don't need to be answering. We don't need to be answering to anybody except each other. So, and that's always extremely amusing, because I think I got a 4-star review, which is not supposed to be horrible, but we're kind of spoiled at this point. And it was just one word, and it just said informative. And I was like, what? But I know that Eshe just laughs. We just laugh back and forth whenever we're concerned about somebody didn't have the most awesome time. But 9 times out of 10, it's going to be 5-star. People send these rambling reviews. And the most beautiful review I actually read last night was somebody was saying that they're feeling much closer to their ancestors. And that is essential to all of the base of African traditional religion. We believe you don't get to God without going through your ancestors first. But that's for everybody, regardless of what your background is. People got some fierce, it's about Celtic folk got some fierce ancestry, indigenous folk, everybody has their brand of that really potent magic. So because we send you back to your ancestors, especially people who are not of more direct African ancestry, and they want to get into the ATRs, we always say, go to your ancestors first. Not only is that where your magic is, the bloodline actually makes a very big difference, but it also kind of mitigates the issue we're seeing right now in New Orleans, which is the majority of the voodoo shops are white owned. The majority of the big names in voodoo are white priests and priestesses. And yes, you have legitimate people of all races in the ATRs, but people of color should never be the minority in anything calling itself a voodoo shop, a voodoo ritual, etc. And so that's just really awesome to hear, because I don't know what the race, we know that it's not real anyway. Culture's real, race is not. We got this. But I don't know what race or background the person was that left that review. But regardless, the fact that they walked away with that message where it's just like, no, you have your, some people call them guardian angels, but it's like we all have that. We're being saved multiple times a day, more than we even know. You know, that truck could have hit us. We could have looked at our phone when we were driving. We don't know how many hits they've taken. So to see a review where somebody says that, it's just like that is the message. Like, and that's also how a lot of this racial healing is going to happen, because we have that in common. It's important to connect people with their own lineage so that we don't go into appropriation, and then eventually we can all meet together because we go back far enough. We got ancestors in common. So, but there's like steps that need to happen. So it's just really exciting to get a review like that.
Wow, that's great. That's great. And I mean, like a lot of people, I don't know, some people maybe don't believe in 5 stars. I remember my dad saying he had a teacher that didn't believe in giving, students all A's kind of thing. So,
Yep, that's true.
but that's great that you could take something like a 4-star review that's one word and say, no, but they were informed, right? Which is the whole purpose of the tour. That's fantastic.
That might be the Virgo in me. That might be nitpicking, but yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. Getting into a little bit more in depth of your tours, what kind of knowledge can your guests gain from your excursions?
So from our tours, I'll start with the scholar-led Black History Music Hoodoo Tour. So what makes it scholar-led is that my master's is in choral conducting with a focus in ethnomusicology, from Georgia State. My undergraduate is from Bennett College, first historically Black college for women. So that's like a HBCU pride thing. And so, of course, when we're talking about the roots of like jazz is largely considered to be the only truly American art form. And of course, you've got all these different cultures that built it. But I'm able to break that down for them in a way that probably goes a little bit more in depth than somebody who maybe was not a music educator, does not have that background. The fact that my thesis was built on European benchmarks saying children of a certain age can't handle complex rhythm. I love the fact that I'm able to share that on the tour, because they see the kids on the paint buckets on Bourbon Street and on Decatur Street, and those rhythms are very complex. And so it's really cool to talk about. The breakdown is really between, as usual, written versus oral and oral education. So it's just really awesome to be able to actually use my degrees, okay, because we're gonna be paying for them until we die. But but also for it to be so valid in for New Orleans to be kind of the heart of all of it, of mixed race relations, of jazz music, of the first site where those West African polyrhythms are introduced to the US. So there's that perspective. So the Black history of music is it's like inextricable. It's very difficult to divide. Admittedly, it's also kind of hard to take the religion out of it, because culture is built up by all of these things. So that's why there's a little bit of hoodoo in it. Hoodoo is what most people think voodoo is. So that's why, we have that in the tour to give people more background on what hoodoo actually is, which is not a religion. That's the most important difference. Not necessarily God-centered. So that's our Black history music hoodoo tour. We go throughout the entirety of Armstrong Park, and we talk about all of the statues of all of the jazz greats and everything, and give context to that. And then we talk about how we're the birthplace of rock and roll and not Memphis. Y'all got to come on a tour. We're going to tell you all about it. Now, as far as our Voodoo Tour, Voodoo, we spell it. We're already getting comments. We already got some comments on our page, and I had to laugh with people saying we don't even know how to say the religion right. And I was just like, you should come on our tour. It's so hard to be like, yeah, it's not. Voodoo is, for the most part, that's the Hollywood term. And so I explained to people, we tell them the origin of the spelling and the term, how we ended up with voodoo being the title. But it's just a really great opportunity, not only to share the roots of that, correct some misconceptions. And the beautiful thing is we're at a point by now, most people know what they're seeing in the movies. They're like, we know that that's not right, but we just want to know what is. And also, how did they get these ideas about like voodoo? So that's the Voodoo Tour. Myself and High Priestess Eshe, we give them in completely different ways. So you never get the same tour twice with us.
Cool.
I would say that my Voodoo Tour is probably less structured. It's more of a conversation. Largely, it's based on the questions that are asked. That's true for High Priestess Eshe as well. But we just, what comes up will just be different because it's automatically, based on whatever's asked at that time. Some things that will
Sure.
come up that you will definitely talk about. We'll talk about the Haitian Revolution. We'll talk about, the differences between Haitian Vodou, Louisiana plantation Vodou, and original Vodou that came from Benin, modern day Benin in Nigeria. We give all of the background, the historical background. And I think the most fun is sharing the stories, some stories about the 7 African powers and breaking down who they are. And sharing kind of the lore, because there are a lot of stories that have been around for thousands of years and they explain scientific concepts, scientific properties. So for example, one of our spirits, Ogun, he's over hand-to-hand combat, he's over metal and technology. And we believe that his hammer hitting the anvil was the Big Bang. So there are so many
Oh,
stories
wow.
like that have thousands of years, and it's like they already had concept, like they already understood these concepts. They just explained them differently. And so it's
Mhm.
really cool to be able to show that. And then people often come with their own experiences, and they always run into each other. That's always a similarity, and that's always exciting when that happens. So that's the Voodoo Tour. And then finally the Blackest Ghost Tour. We named it that because I'm almost 7 years into doing this. And Eshe and I both were used to getting, 5-star reviews with the companies that we used to work for. But every couple of years, I would get a review that said I did not come on a ghost tour to hear Black history. And so when we started our company, Eshe was like, we just gonna name our tour the Blackest Ghost Tour. So there's no confusion. You knew what you signed up for. And
That's
so that's why
fantastic.
it's the Blackest Ghost Tour. So what it is the hilarious thing is I tell people when I was working for other companies, because now I'm full-time for us, they would say, so what's the
Yeah.
difference between the ones you do for the other companies and the ones that you do for your own? And I was like, oh, you elected to have this tour. If you get me, it's going to be a Black tour. It doesn't matter if it's Garden District. It doesn't matter if it's going to be Ghosts and Vampire. It's going to be rooted in the stories of free people of color or enslaved people here in New Orleans, because there are tons of ghost stories that have exactly to do with that. And when I was writing an article for TripAdvisor, they wanted me to see if there were other, Black run ghost tours in the nation. And I don't know if they're just not advertising it, but most of the Black owned companies are trying to talk about our history, which is really, really important. But I kind of love that we have the Blackest Ghost Tour because it's a fun way to learn some of the history. And it's also, it gives you your little, chills and thrills that you get because this is a creepy ass city. I love it so much. But yeah, so it's like you get that, you also get some of the history. And yeah, out of the 7, 8 stops, there's only one that doesn't have to do with people of color. And so it's like, but you knew that when you signed up. So, and we haven't
Yeah.
had any complaints thus far. I've had whole groups of Caucasians on the Blackest Ghost Tour, and that is so much fun. Just because it's just like, no, it doesn't mean only Black people come on the tour. It's like anyone who really wants to get maybe a more authentic side. You can come with us. And that's not to say there aren't other authentic tours, but it's really hard to weed them out.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's just unique, I mean, when I first, met you when we were talking about this, I had never heard of a specific Black ghost tour. There's tons of ghost tours, right? But just hearing some of the stories you guys tell, I think it's really, really unique. And that's awesome that you guys are in New Orleans doing that.
Thank you.
So can you tell me about your tour guides? Obviously, you're one of them. You mentioned Eshe, and y'all's relevant education and expertise. I know you touched on yours a little bit as well.
So High Priestess Eshe is she's just like this magical being. She was working on her MFA at one time in creative writing. And if anybody knows, it is so hard to get into a creative writing MFA. I think they said it's like easier to get into Harvard because they're just so they're so competitive. But she had a teacher who told her that she had too many Black main characters in her work, and that all that he said that everything becomes 10 years or 10 years a slave or 8 years a slave or whatever it was. And I was just like, my jaw dropped. So she left of her own volition because she was just like, this is not how this is going to move forward. But her level of brilliance is probably unmatched, just period. As far as she's a voracious reader, an amazing writer. I really think that she's possibly going to be her generation's like Toni Morrison. Like, she's ridiculous. And then, of course, High Priestess of Louisiana Plantation Voodoo, but she's been interacting with the spirits since she was a child. She's been aware, but didn't know what to call them. And then when she started her training and her studies to get her different levels of initiation in Voodoo, she realized, she was like, oh, that's who that was. And so it just kind of snapped everything into focus for her. She's someone who does see spirits manifest. That's, I would say, I don't want to say rare, but it's not as common. And somebody had to actually explain to me, we talk about this in the tours as well, that for the most part, when spirit or the divine talks to you, it's going to be a thought. It's going to be in your own voice. It's the voice you're most comfortable hearing. And you just learn to be able to discern when it's them. But for High Priestess Eshe, she experiences it on a whole different, very visceral level. And it's really beautiful to watch. And so we give tours from basically different standpoints in the way that spirit interacts with us. So I think that just coupled with having that Western education, as well as having a relationship with the spirits, it's not something that can really be learned in books. You get to know certain things about them, but once you actually are able to interact and you start to be able to tell when they're, letting you know things, that's when it's like you unlock a whole other level. And so we're able to share that in tours. Of course, everything you can't share in tours. What happens in initiations happen behind closed doors. But like the meat of it, like the spirit and what it's like when they come down in possession and all of that, we can share all of that. And it's a really big gift to do. And it's really awesome to be able to do it as somebody. I am somewhat like, I believe in the woo, but I'm also somewhat of a skeptic. And so I love being able to do these tours with people and explain to them, like, no, I'm not somebody who's just going to blindly be like, oh, that's what this is. Cause I'm like, I need to see something. I need to see something. And spirit will do that. It's funny because they do it a lot. Some people call them God shots. Some people call them winks, but they do things on a pretty regular basis just to let you know, you're not crazy. Yes, it was us. You know what I'm saying? It is me. Because they know that, our fallible human minds are just like, but is it really? Could it just have been a coincidence? So I would say that that's between having the education, but more importantly than the education, we're not giving this tour from a standpoint of scholars. We're giving this tour from a standpoint of initiates. So that's, yeah, I would say that that's probably above everything. It's not something we put on. It's something 24/7. It's a part of your life 24/7.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I'm glad that you mentioned the skeptics thing. So like, even if you do have people that are skeptics, like they're still gonna enjoy these tours and your passion and you sharing your beliefs and your culture.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
That's fantastic. So how has the reception been to your tours? I know you mentioned, getting lots of great reviews. And do you find that your guests represent a diverse background?
Yes, our guests do represent a diverse background. That's sometimes like the most enjoyable part of it is you never know who's going to show up. One of the first things, especially for the Blackest Ghost Tour, I like to start the tour by asking people what attracted them to the tour, because we never give the same tour twice anyway. So I want to make sure, like, if American Horror Story Season 3 Coven is your foundation, that lets me know what you need to hear and how much undoing I have to do, Lord. But I mean, excellent casting, but it definitely got problematic.
Yeah, right.
Lord. But it's really fun hearing about what makes people, and some people show up and I just crack up. Because some people show up and I'll be like, so what made you pick the tour? And they'll be like, because you Black and I'm Black. Okay,
Oh,
that's a
yeah,
great reason to show up for the tour. Because honestly,
for
I think
sure.
now when I started, there were only maybe 3 Black tour guides that I saw on a regular basis, giving tours in the
Wow.
quarter. Now we're closer to 10 at least. So I'm just like, okay, good. Like it's shifting and changing. But the reason that that's important is that New Orleans, the last census, the census of 2020 said New Orleans is over 60% Black.
Absolutely.
But
Yeah, I
if
was
you
going to
don't
ask.
leave the
I knew
French
it was.
Quarter, you're
Yeah.
never going to see that. So it's a very big problem when we over 60% Black, but 90 something percent of the tour guides are Caucasian. Like that's a problem. So I know that people want to say we live in a post-racial America and all this other foolishness. But it's like, no, we're not, you're not getting a balanced perspective, period. Like that's just, So it is very, very, very diverse. People come. We also have discovered that our pricing our pricing makes a difference for who shows up. So usually we don't get like the people who are just here to drink and fall out on the ghost tour, because they don't want to, spend the money for a tour that, they can go get 2-for-1 hurricane somewhere, do what they need to do. But
Right.
it means that we're able to engage in actual conversation. Like rarely will someone come on the tour just to mess with you. It does happen, not often, but
Wow.
it hasn't happened to me yet, or if it did, I didn't notice. So there's that. Mm-hmm.
That's great. Where can people find you online if they want to book a tour or see you on social media?
You can visit our website, so www.anansisdaughters.com. And from there are actually like links to all the other stuff, but we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, and we're on TikTok. So we're pretty easily findable. And yeah, I hope y'all do come and check us out, and definitely come to New Orleans and go on some tours with us.
Fantastic. Is there anything else you want to add before we wrap up?
I want to say that there is no place in the world like New Orleans, for better or for worse. She's almost her own dimension. And it's an easy way to feel like you left the country without having to leave the country if you live in the US. And you're going to have a memorable experience in New Orleans. So I just want to encourage as many people to come. And if you want to do your Bourbon Street, do your Bourbon Street, but just know that that's like less than 1/16 of what New Orleans has to offer. Come check it out. You're going to want to come back, because I tell people New Orleans is not a bad city to have to come back to. There's just so much to do and learn and know and see. So I just like to encourage folks to come to New Orleans and dig into some of this amazing history.
Gosh, you're so right. I mean, you're preaching to the choir here, because I absolutely adore New Orleans. I've been visiting the city for over 25 years now, and I tell people, yeah, Bourbon Street, that's great. And if you want to, you should absolutely check it out. But there's so much history and culture and music and art and cuisine and just everything. So definitely booking a tour. First time to New Orleans, 20th time to New Orleans. It's always going to be a great way to experience the city. And I think that you, Eshe, Anansi's daughters, are really providing the city with a really great opportunity to share your wonderful passion and knowledge. So,
thank you.
Great. You're welcome. Welcome. Well, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you for inviting me.
Once again, that was Malika Hadley Freydberg, the co-owner of Anansi's Daughters. Thanks for joining us on our first Seaworthy Client Spotlight interview. If you like this video, be sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications. We'll see you next time.